You open your eyes, and the first thing you register is not light, but the absence of it. The room is submerged in a controlled dimness, the kind of darkness only money can buy. Opaque silk curtains imported from Milan, windows with 21mm thick armored glass, the same kind embassies use in conflict zones. You are lying in a bed that cost more than the house where you grew up, and for 3 seconds, exactly 3, there is a pause in your brain where you are nobody. You are not the name that appears on newspaper covers next to the word fugitive. You are not the ghost that feeds the nightmares of prosecutors and federal agents across 4 continents. You are not the man whose head carries a price of $25 million, a figure the United States Department of State updated 6 months ago, after the last informant who tried to collect it turned up in 9 garbage bags distributed across 9 different states in Mexico. During those 3 seconds, you are just a warm body under Egyptian cotton sheets with a 1200 thread count. And then the biological clock of survival kicks in like an electric shock at the base of your skull, and you remember who you are, where you are, and above all, how many people want you to stop breathing before the day is over. You sit up. The weight of the world is not a metaphor for you. It is a literal pressure in your chest. A muscular knot between your shoulder blades that no masseuse has been able to undo in 15 years, because that knot is not physical. It is the permanent contraction of an animal that knows every second of calm is borrowed. You check the first phone, the disposable Nokia you swap every 72 hours, and that has only one number saved, your head of security, a former Israeli military operative who deserted from the Sayeret Matkal after a classified operation in Lebanon, and who now earns $40,000 a month to keep you alive. No messages. The absence of messages at 5:14 in the morning is the only good news that exists in your vocabulary. It means nobody died, nobody talked, no MQ-9 Reaper drone from the DEA flew over your coordinates during the night. You stand up barefoot, and the travertine marble floor sends a sting of cold through the soles of your feet that climbs all the way to the back of your neck. You walk to the window and pull back 3 centimeters of curtain. Only 3, because the discipline of visual geometry was taught to you by a retired sniper from the French GING, who now works for you. 3 centimeters is enough to see without being seen, to confirm the perimeter remains intact, that the 4 men posted at the corners of the property are still at their stations with their FN SCAR H rifles chambered in 7.62 by 51 millimeters. That the flare thermal cameras mounted on the garden posts detected no intrusions. Beyond the 4-meter reinforced concrete wall, the city sleeps. From this height, on the 14th floor of a YESD building that officially belongs to an anonymous corporation registered in the British Virgin Islands, whose ownership chain passes through 3 trusts in Liechtenstein, before vanishing into a labyrinth of shell companies in Panama, the city looks innocent. Flickering lights, the distant murmur of early morning traffic, a dog barking in some alley. But you know what lies beneath that innocence because you put it there. Every gram of cocaine snorted in the downtown clubs passed through your supply chain. Every $100 bill a politician keeps in his secret safe carries the invisible fingerprint of your organization. Every judge who acquits your operators does so because someone on your payroll deposited the exact amount into the right account at the precise moment. You are the architect of an empire that does not exist on any official organizational chart, but that moves more money per year than the gross domestic product of 37 countries. And yet, this morning, like every morning, the first thing you feel is not power. It is fear. An ancient, primitive fear that lives in the reptilian part of your brain and never ever turns off. You were not always this. There was a time when you were just another number, a poverty statistic in a neighborhood where the streets had no names and the houses had no numbers. You grew up in a settlement of sheet metal roofs where water arrived 3 times a week, and the permanent smell was a mixture of raw sewage, burnt tortilla, and desperation. Your father was a man who worked 18 hours a day hauling cement bags at a construction site and who came home with wrecked hands, a broken back, and a wage that was not enough to buy the antibiotics your younger sister needed for the lung infection that ended up killing her at 11 years old because the public hospital had a 4-month waiting list and the private clinic demanded an advance payment of 80,000 pesos that your father could not scrape together, even if he sold a kidney. You watched her die in a borrowed bed, coughing dark blood onto a yellowed pillow, and something broke inside you in a way so clean and so final that there was no sound. You did not cry. You did not scream. You simply registered a piece of data. In this world, money decides who lives and who dies, and you were on the wrong side of that equation. You were 14 years old with an intelligence the educational system never knew how to use, because teachers at public schools in marginalized zones are not trained to identify genius. They are trained to survive the shift. But you had it. You could look at a chain of numbers and find the pattern in seconds. You could read a person, their gestures, their micro-expressions, the dilation of their pupils, the frequency of their blinking, and know whether they were lying with a precision that a forensic psychologist would later describe as high-functioning sociopathic intuition, though you never called it that. You called it attention. Attention to detail. And that attention was what saved you and what condemned you. The first man who recognized your talent was Don Aurelio, and if the devil exists, he wore a linen guayabera, crocodile shoes, and smelled of Agua de Parma cologne. Don Aurelio was the nominal owner of 3 gas stations, a soft drink distributor, and a chain of laundromats in the state. But his real business was the trafficking of Colombian cocaine from the port of Lázaro Cárdenas to the border at Nogales. You met him at 17 because you worked as an assistant bookkeeper at one of his gas stations. A job you got by lying about your age and which you performed with an efficiency that caught the attention of his administrator. Don Aurelio invited you to lunch at a restaurant where a plate of shrimp cost what your father earned in 2 weeks. He watched you eat with the clumsiness of someone who had never used more than one fork, and he smiled, not with cruelty, but with the clinical recognition of a talent scout who has just found a rough diamond. He asked you one question. Kid, do you think the world is fair? And you, with your mouth full of shrimp and your eyes locked on his, told him no. That the world was a mechanism designed so that those at the bottom stayed at the bottom and those at the top stayed at the top, and that the only way to break that mechanism was to understand its gears better than those who built it. Don Aurelio set his fork on the plate, leaned back in his chair and said, "I am going to show you the gears." The offer did not come wrapped in threats or violence. It came wrapped in logic. He explained that he needed someone who could handle numbers, who understood cash flows, who could look at a balance sheet and distinguish between what was legal and what was laundered without raising suspicion. He did not ask you to kill anyone. He did not ask you to transport drugs. He asked you to do what you already knew how to do, count, but on a different scale. The rationalization was instant and perfect. You were not a criminal, you were an accountant. Numbers have no morality. A peso is a peso, no matter where it comes from. And if the system had denied your sister her medicine, then the system had no moral authority to judge you. That was the first lie you told yourself, and it was so comfortable, so perfectly tailored to your pain, that you accepted it as truth. You were 17 years old, wearing a borrowed suit, and your hands were clean. The hands would not get dirty until much later, but the soul, that abstract thing you stopped believing in the night your sister drowned in her own blood, that you had already sold. Don Aurelio put you to work in a back office of the soft drink distributor, a windowless room with a metal desk, a Casio calculator, and 200 folders full of invoices that did not add up because they were not supposed to. Your job was to make them add up. You learned fast. You learned that money laundering is not an act. It is a system with 3 phases that the manuals of the Financial Intelligence Unit call placement, layering, and integration. Placement is introducing dirty cash into the financial system, and for that, Don Aurelio used the laundromats. Not by semantic coincidence, but by volume. A laundry business handles hundreds of small cash transactions per day, and nobody questions whether a laundromat built 300 loads or 400, because there is no physical inventory to audit. You created the phantom invoices, generated the inflated sales reports, distributed the surplus in fraction deposits of less than $10,000 to avoid the automatic reports of the banking system, a technique the feds call smurfing that you perfected until it became art. Layering was moving that money through layers of shell companies, international transfers, and asset purchases that obscured its origin. And that is where you discovered your true talent. Fictitious corporate architecture. You created companies in low-regulation jurisdictions, Belize, the Seychelles, Samoa, connected them to each other through fictitious service contracts, non-existent consultancies, royalties for patents that did not exist, and the money flowed from one to another, like water through a plumbing system designed so that when someone turned on the final faucet, the liquid came out crystal clear with a certificate of purity. Integration was the final step. The money, now clean, returned to the real world in the form of legitimate investments, real estate, fast food franchises, dental clinics, legal businesses that generated employment and paid taxes, and whose profits nobody questioned, because on the surface, everything was impeccable. You were the hydraulic engineer of the entire system. Don Aurelio watched you work with a mixture of admiration and caution. The same look a tamer gives a young tiger that has learned to jump through the hoops but whose predatory nature remains intact behind the eyes. In 2 years, you tripled the laundering capacity of the organization. In 3, you were no longer the accountant. You were the chief financial officer of a cartel that moved $400 million a year. Don Aurelio's death was not violent, and that was what made it so unsettling. He was not gunned down in an ambush or found decapitated on a highway. He died on a Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon, sitting in his favorite armchair, with a Garcia Marquez book open on his lap and a cup of coffee that was still warm when his wife found him. Massive heart attack. 73 years old. The heart simply decided it was enough. And in the power vacuum his death created, a vacuum that lasted exactly 11 days, you learned the most important lesson of your life. That in this business, power is not inherited, it is taken, and that silence is more eloquent than any speech. While Don Aurelio's lieutenants fought among themselves with the grace of stray dogs disputing a bone, while they accused each other of treason and raised their weapons at meetings that ended with tablecloths splattered in blood, you did something none of them expected. You did not speak. You did not take sides. You simply kept doing your job, moving the money, paying the payrolls, keeping the financial machinery running. And when the smoke cleared and the survivors looked around, searching for who could keep the operation alive, every eye converged on you. Not because you were the strongest, not because you were the most feared, but because you were the only one who knew where every cent was, every account, every document, every secret. The money was the blood of the organism, and you were the only one who knew the complete map of the circulatory system. You took control without firing a single bullet, without raising your voice, without slamming a table. You took it with a spreadsheet, a satellite phone, and one sentence you said to the last. Lieutenant Standing, a man with scarred knuckles and the eyes of someone who has seen hell from the inside. You can kill me right now, but if you do, the $47 million currently in transit between Zurich and the Cayman Islands will be frozen forever because the decryption keys for the accounts are in my head, and my head only works while I am breathing. The man stared at you for 10 seconds that lasted an eternity, and then, slowly, lowered his gun. You were 27 years old. The first thing you did as boss was what no previous boss had done: professionalize the violence. Don Aurelio administered brutality like a craftsman, case by case, decision by decision, with the intuition of a man from another era. You turned it into a department with a budget, protocols, and performance metrics. You hired a former colonel of the Guatemalan army who had led counterinsurgency operations in the Petén during the darkest years of the armed conflict, a man who understood violence not as emotion, but as logistical tool. And you gave him carte blanche to build what was internally called the Human Resources Department, a corporate euphemism for a squad of 15 operators trained in target neutralization, counterintelligence, and crisis management. Each operator had a base salary of $15,000 per month plus performance bonuses, private health insurance for their families, and a retirement fund that vested after 10 years of service because you understood something your competitors did not. That loyalty is not bought with fear, it is bought with stability. A man who knows his children are protected is a man who does not talk, who does not betray, who does not negotiate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. The second thing you did was diversify. Cocaine was the pillar, but a single pillar is a fragile structure. You expanded into synthetic heroin, fentanyl, whose production required chemical precursors imported from China, that arrived declared as textile industry materials, specifically N-phenyl-4 piperidinone, a compound that on the international trade table has a 6-digit tariff code your chemists knew by heart, and that your customs agents, duly compensated, let pass without opening the containers. You set up 3 clandestine laboratories in rural areas, each with the capacity to produce 20 kilograms of fentanyl per cycle, enough to supply the American Midwest market for a month. The third thing you did was enter the illegal mining business, extracting gold and tungsten from abandoned concessions in the mountains, smelting the ore into ingots exported to refineries in Dubai where nobody asked about the origin. And that flow of precious metal became your second laundering channel, cleaner and harder to trace than Don Aurelio's laundromats. You learned to live at the exact center of a web whose dimensions not even you could fully grasp. Your organization operated in 14 countries and had more than 3,000 people on its payroll, from the peasants who cultivated the poppy in the mountains to the Wall Street lawyers who structured the investment vehicles where the money was recycled. You had a fleet of 11 Cessna, 2 O-6 aircraft modified with extended fuel tanks that could cover the route from Honduras to clandestine airstrips in the Sonoran Desert without refueling, and each aircraft was registered in the name of a fictitious agricultural company with a tax address in Belize. You had 3 go-fast speedboats with 300 horsepower Yamaha engines each, capable of transporting 2 tons of cocaine from the Colombian coast to transshipment points in Guatemala in under 24 hours, navigating at night with military GPS systems purchased on the Eastern European black market. You had an intelligence team that monitored the communications of anti-narcotics agencies using signal interception technology you had acquired through a South African intermediary, who previously sold the same equipment to African governments to spy on political opponents. You knew in real time when the DEA was planning an operation, when a prosecutor was preparing an arrest warrant, when an informant was negotiating his cooperation. And for every piece of information you received, you made a cold, mathematical decision devoid of emotion. Reroute a shipment, silence a witness, buy an official, or simply wait, because sometimes the best move in chess is not to move any piece at all. What nobody tells you about being the most wanted man in the world is that loneliness has texture. It is a physical, tangible thing that settles on your skin like an invisible layer of ash. You cannot go to a restaurant. You cannot walk down a street. You cannot attend your mother's funeral, and when she dies, on a Thursday in November, from a pancreatic cancer that consumed her in 4 months while you paid the best oncologists in the country to treat her in a private clinic under a false name. You find out through a coded call, and you cry alone, in an armored room, biting a towel so the guards on the other side of the door cannot hear you. Because the boss does not cry, the boss has no weaknesses. The boss is an entity, not a person. And when your eldest son, whom you have not seen in 3 years, because he lives in Europe under a fabricated identity, with a Spanish passport obtained through a document forgery network operating out of Lisbon, when your son calls you on his 15th birthday and says, "Dad, when are you coming?" You tell him, "Soon, son, soon." And the word soon tastes like ground glass in your throat because you know it is a lie. Because soon does not exist in your dictionary, because your future has 3 options and only 3: prison, death, or this life suspended among the shadows that is not life, but a simulation of existence funded with the blood of others. You hang up, destroy the phone, burn it with a lighter, stamp out the ashes, and pull out another identical phone from a box containing 50 of them, and you carry on. You wake up every morning at 5, not out of discipline, but out of paranoia. You sleep a maximum of 4 hours because deep sleep is a luxury the dead can afford. Your morning routine is a security protocol. You check the perimeter cameras on an encrypted tablet, receive the overnight report from your head of security, verify the positions of your convoy vehicles through a satellite tracking system that operates on a private frequency, and only then, after confirming the world did not collapse while you slept, do you allow yourself the only act of normality you have left? Making coffee. You do it yourself, with a pour-over method you learned from a Colombian barista who worked on one of your laundering farms in the coffee region. And while the water boils and the aroma of high-altitude Arabica fills the kitchen, you close your eyes and for 30 seconds pretend you are a normal man in a normal kitchen living a normal life. Then you open your eyes and reality returns with the weight of a concrete block. There is a shipment of 700 kilograms of cocaine stuck in a container at the port of Algeciras because a Spanish customs official who was on your payroll was transferred without notice. There is a lab in Sinaloa that needs 200 liters of hydrochloric acid, and your Chinese supplier was intercepted by the maritime police in the Strait of Malacca. There is a lawyer in Miami who wants to renegotiate his fees because he says the risk has increased after the FBI opened a new line of investigation. There is a governor in the South who is asking for more money for his elections and is making veiled threats to withdraw police protection from your operating zone. And you, with a cup of coffee in your hand and your bare feet on the cold marble, take each problem for what it is: a variable in an equation you must solve before noon. The Spanish official will be replaced by another. You already have 3 candidates identified by your liaison in Madrid. The hydrochloric acid will come from an alternative supplier in India. The route is longer, but the price is lower. The lawyer will receive a 20% raise and a subtle reminder of what happened to the last lawyer who confused negotiation with extortion. The governor will receive his money, but he will also receive an envelope with photographs of him at a hotel in Cancun with a woman who is not his wife. So he understands that the relationship is one of mutual dependence, not servitude. There is a man in your organization they call the Gardener, and it is not a poetic nickname. Before working for you, he was literally a gardener at a municipal nursery, a quiet man with peasant hands, and a gaze so expressionless he seems to be perpetually thinking about the weather. Now he is in charge of what is internally called waste management, and his job consists of making bodies disappear with an efficiency that would border on artistic if it were not so profoundly revolting. He uses industrial caustic soda, sodium hydroxide concentrated at 98%, dissolved in 200-liter drums of water, heated to 80 degrees Celsius. And in that chemical bath, a human body dissolves in approximately 6 hours, reducing itself to a dark brown sludge with the consistency of thick soup and a smell he describes, with a naturalness that chills your blood, as rancid soap mixed with roasted meat. You have never witnessed the process. You do not need to. But you know it exists. You know it happens at a ranch 40 kilometers outside the city. You know the gardener has processed more than 130 bodies in the last 4 years. And you know that each of those bodies was once a person with a name, a family, a story that was interrupted because you, at some point, in some meeting, with some nearly imperceptible gesture, a nod, an ambiguous phrase like, "Make it go," "Away," gave the order. And that is the part that does not appear in the television series or the ballads or the narco novels. It is not the blood that corrodes you. It is the abstraction. It is the clinical distance between your word and someone's death. It is the ease with which your brain converts a person into a logistics problem, a number, a variable that gets eliminated from the equation so the other numbers keep adding up. There are nights when you wake up drenched in sweat and you do not know if it was a nightmare or a memory, and the distinction has ceased to matter because both produce the same metallic taste in your mouth, the same tremor in your hands that disappears after 3 glasses of Japanese whiskey that costs $400 a bottle, and that you drink alone, always alone, in the darkness of a room that is both a fortress and a prison. Your wife left 6 years ago, not because she was threatened, but because the truth, when it finally reached her, was more toxic than any threat. She knew, of course she knew. No wife is naive enough to believe that a chain of laundromats generates enough money to buy a 40-hectare ranch with a private airstrip. But she had built a wall of denial so thick and so comfortable that she lived inside it like a mansion of lies with central heating. The wall collapsed the day she found blood on the inner lining of your jacket. Not much, just a stain the size of a coin, but it was human blood, and it was in a place where blood should not be. And she, who had been a biologist by training before your money turned her into a society woman who organized charity galas and bought contemporary art, recognized the ferrous smell and the sticky texture, and knew, with the scientific certainty of someone who has worked in laboratories, that the stain was not from an accidental wound. There were no screams. There were no broken plates. Just a suitcase, a late-night flight, and a text message that said, "Do not look for me. The children are with me. If you love me like you say, let us disappear." And you let her. Because deep down, beneath all the layers of cynicism and calculation, there remained a microscopic residue of humanity that recognized the most generous thing you could do for the people you loved was to distance yourself from them the way one steps back from a nuclear reactor in meltdown, slowly, with respect, aware that your mere proximity is radiation. Now your children carry other last names in another country and attend schools where nobody knows who their father is, and you watch them grow through photographs that an intermediary sends you every 3 months on a USB drive encrypted with a 256-bit AES algorithm. And every time you open those photos on a computer with no internet connection, in a room electronically swept for microphones, you feel a pain so precise and so localized you could point to it with your finger. It is here, right here, behind the sternum. Slightly to the left, where they say the heart lives. The hunt intensifies. You know because the signals are unmistakable to someone who has spent 15 years reading the body language of institutions. There is more aerial activity over your operating zones. Beechcraft King. Air 350 planes equipped with electronic surveillance systems flying in circular patterns at 10,000 meters altitude. Too high to see, but not too high to detect. With the counter-surveillance equipment, your intelligence chief operates from a van parked at different points around the city each day. There are selective arrests of mid-level operators, people who know enough to be useful to prosecutors, but not enough to reach you. And those arrests are the classic DEA technique of building an ascending case, climbing the pyramid, squeezing the small fish until he gives up the medium one, squeezing the medium one until he gives up the big one. You know that somewhere in Virginia, in a gray building with no sign, there is a war room with your photograph at the center of a board, surrounded by red threads connecting faces, names, dates, transactions, and that a team of 30 analysts works 24 hours a day to find the mistake, the crack, the moment of carelessness that will allow them to locate you. And you, who have built your entire life on the premise that such a mistake will never exist, begin to feel, for the first time in years, something that resembles doubt. Not because you have made a mistake, but because perfection is unsustainable. Because you are human, and humans are imperfect by design. And statistics say that, given enough time, every system fails. There is a night when your body betrays you. You are alone in a mountain-safe house at 2 a.m, a cold cup of coffee, and a silent satellite phone on the table next to the white orchid. And without warning, you begin to tremble. Your heart spikes to 140 beats per minute, and for 90 seconds you are convinced you are dying. And in those seconds, you think about everything you never did. You did not watch your daughter grow up. You did not bury your mother properly. You did not ask forgiveness from the brother who returned your money with a note that said, "I would rather be poor than be your accomplice." The panic attack lasts 6 minutes. When it ends, you are on the floor in the fetal position, and the man you find in the cracked bathroom mirror is a stranger whose eyes belong to a boy who died a long time ago. The fall begins with the emergency phone. A convoy with 240 kilograms of fentanyl was intercepted in Arizona. One operator is cooperating. That information, crossed with what the clockmaker already gave the feds, draws a tightening circle around you. Your lawyer confirms 13 federal charges, including RICO. Mandatory life. You hang up. The orchid says nothing. You have 24 hours and 3 options. Run, but that means losing the Sunday call with your daughter, and without it, you are a corpse with a pulse. Fight, but drones and artificial intelligence have made war a guaranteed death sentence. The gun on your waist, but your children would grow up knowing you chose the coward's exit. Then a fourth option forms slowly: letting go. You call your lawyer and say 3 words. I want to negotiate. Full cooperation, 20 to 30 years, confiscation of everything. You say yes, not from bravery, but from a molecular exhaustion that no longer distinguishes between living and dying. You empty the pistol bullet by bullet onto the table, 15 golden cylinders that sound like the end of a song, and leave the weapon next to the orchid. You walk out into mountain air that smells of pine and wet earth, something clean that existed before you dirtied it. Hands open, you walk toward the armored vehicles. They throw you to the ground, cuff you, lift you into a helicopter. Through the window, the country unfolds below like a map of everything you built and destroyed, and both are the same thing. They put you in a cell 3 meters by 3 meters with a light that never turns off, and you sit on the bunk and say what you have not said in 20 years. I am afraid. The fear is pure, without calculation. The most honest thing you have felt since you were a boy, walking toward a school with torn books. The wall does not answer, and you are still there, breathing, which is the only thing you have left, and the only thing you never knew how to appreciate.